Hey, welcome to the Coin Box. In this video, we're going to compare both 1991 Libertad designs, the Type 1 and the Type 2, and then we'll go over the specs on both coins as well as how much they cost. The price difference between these two might surprise you. So let's get started. The 1991 Libertads are unique because there were two different designs issued the same year, much like we saw last year with the American Silver Eagles when the design was changed. Both designs feature the same elements but with slight differences. We'll start by looking at 1 ONZA. So on the Type 1, ONZA is lowercase in a serif font, and on the Type 2, ONZA has ornamental capitalization in a sans-serif font with a large O and Z. Then we have Plata Pura in all caps on the left, and on the right, once again, the ornamental capitalization with a small A and U. I honestly don't know if there's a special significance in the font style, but I think it would have been awesome if only the symbol for silver were AU instead of AG, because then it could pass as being an abbreviation for 1 ounce of silver. The lower inscriptions are also different, most notably in the number 9s. Then we can see the mountains are slightly different as well. Here's Iztaccíhuatl, and here's Popocatépetl. Then take a look at the mint mark, and you can see a big difference there as well. And finally, Winged Victory herself was resculpted, and I think the most noticeable difference is her hairstyle. Here are both reverse designs overlaid so we can see the overall differences between the two. On the obverse, the coat of arms is nearly identical. The distinguishing element is the cactus pad directly below the eagle. The Type 1 has 7 dots, and the Type 2 has 8 dots on that pad. It's a subtle difference, but significant, and it's often what's written on graded slabs to distinguish between the two types. And once again, here's the overlay of both obverse designs. Next up, let's go over the specs of both coins, beginning with what they have in common. While it's very clear that the finish on the new Libertad series, beginning in 1996, is a satin finish, it's much harder to find any official specs on the finish of these two Libertads. I believe they are generally considered to have the same finish, which is often referred to as a bullion finish or brilliant uncirculated finish. But even if there's no specific name difference, there is definitely a visual difference between the two finishes. The Type 1 has a brighter, stronger, higher contrast cartwheel luster, whereas the Type 2 has a slightly more muted luster and is definitely more of a satin finish. So other than the design change, I would assume the die or planchet preparation process also changed slightly between the Type 1 and Type 2. These are both older style Libertads, which are known as gorditas in Mexico because of their thicker dimensions. They're both 36mm in diameter and 3.47mm thick. Since 1996, the newer style Libertads measure 40mm in diameter and only 3mm thick. These also both have a reeded edge, unlike the Libertads in the 80s that had a lettered edge. Here's where the specs are different. The 1991 Type 1 was the last year of the original design, first issued in 1982. The refreshed design on the Type 2 was used until 1995 with a few minor changes along the way. There were over 1.6 million Type 1s minted, and it's a relatively common date Libertad. But there are no official mintages for the Type 2. Coin books and catalogs will say the mintage of the Type 2 is included in the Type 1, but with no estimate as to how many were actually struck. In my last video, I mentioned that the 1991 was the first year of fractional Libertads, which were issued in 5 coin sets like this one. There were only 50,000 sets issued, which is what the mintage is for each of the 4 fractionals. And they all feature the same design as the Type 2. So one theory is that there were as few as 50,000 Type 2s minted. So there's a very real possibility that the Type 2 is scarcer than the 1998 Libertad, which officially has the lowest mintage of the series with 67,000 coins produced. And personally, I have seen far more 98s posted online for sale than I have Type 2s. But even if it were true that the 91 Type 2 is scarcer than the 98, it would still make sense for the 98 to be in higher demand simply because most collectors looking to fill the 91 slot in their album, for example, will simply buy 91 Type 1, since most albums on the market only have 1 slot for that year anyway. Whereas there is only one 1998. And that brings us to the value difference between both 1991s. The Type 1 currently costs around $40 to $50, and the Type 2 sells for anywhere between $100 and $150. But definitely keep an eye out for the Type 2s because every so often they'll fly under the radar and you might be able to pick them up cheaper. The best deal I ever found was 3 Type 2s for $45 each, which was pretty amazing. And finally, as I've already mentioned, the quickest way to tell them apart is the font on the reverse and the dots on the obverse. If you've made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it and I thank you for watching. Feel free to leave me a comment below, and if you liked this video, share it with a fellow Libertad collector. I'll leave you with a short cinematic sequence of the 1991 Libertads, and I'll see you in the next one.